What's going on, guys? Welcome to 6 Yard Workshop. In today's video, I'm going to be showing you guys how I put down this 1 foot by 2 foot tile and made it pretty darn level at the front entryway of my 100-plus-year-old house, as well as giving you some tips and tricks. First thing we're going to do is take up this oak floor, and it's over 70 years old. We found newspaper underneath it that they used to level the floor when they put it in from 1939. So we're going to take this up, but we're going to save it so we can patch floors later. It might come in handy to do a really nice project with it sometime. So we're gonna hang on to it and we'll go from there. So for this demo, and really any demo, I would recommend picking up one of these pry bars. They're a lot more versatile than a crowbar. They're smaller, they fit into smaller spaces. I feel like you can wail on them a lot more and they take more abuse. So when taking up the flooring, you can kind of see here that there's a groove right on this side of the wood. There's a groove on this side of the wood. So there's a direction to take up the floor, starting from the groove side, going to the non-groove side. If you do it the other way, you're going to try to pull this one out ahead of this one, and that groove is going to chip this piece of wood. So if you're trying to save it, make sure you do this properly. I would also advise taking all the nails out while you're already down here. For those that are wondering, we decided to leave most of the newspaper on the ground. I think that's a really cool thing for future homeowners to find long after we're out of this house. We did, however, pick out the best looking piece of newspaper and actually framed it. And it's really cool because it talks about Teddy Roosevelt as well as Hitler, which I think is freaking awesome. And it now permanently hangs above a bench right at our front door. So I am saving this wood and I'll probably do another project with it. But I think it's a good thing we tore it up and we're replacing it with tile. It's right at the front door and it's basically taken 70 years of abuse. It's all rotten, wet, and the nails are just completely rusted. Underneath the tile, I'm going to use a membrane most people have probably heard of called Schluter Dietra. And I didn't want to put that right down on the subfloor because it's a 110-year-old house and the subfloor is shrank. There's tons of gaps in there and it's very uneven. So I'm putting some 1/4-inch plywood to go down between the subfloor and the membrane. And you might notice I'm cutting it into small strips as opposed to just doing giant sheets and cutting the outline. This is mainly to save as much wood as possible. It's not a bad way to go. You just got to make sure it's level and there's no humps where the plywood butts together. So this house is 107 years old, and the subfloor is 1-inch by 10-inch planks. It's not plywood because plywood didn't exist back then. It's very wavy, and instead of cutting the subfloor up, putting down plywood for this, I just put down this 1/4-inch sheet. There's a little bit of waviness to it still, but it's a lot better. And there's 2 things that are going to save us, fingers crossed. Maybe three things that are going to save us, fingers crossed. One is this. It's a membrane that allows the wood underneath to flex and move without cracking the tile. So I'm hoping that's going to help. 2 is we're going to do a 1/3 stagger. So we're going to go about 8 inches like this, as opposed to like a brick, like halfway. And that's going to minimize the amount of lippage between the 2 tiles. And the third thing, I forget what these are called, but I'll put something up on screen. But basically, they go underneath the tile like this. They're tile spacers. They go underneath the tile, like that. But then you have this little wedge that wedges into here. So you put this wedge in and use your tool to push it forwards. And what that does is it levels both tiles together by using the wedge and this piece underneath to sandwich them flat. So hopefully that's going to save us from having wavy ripped tiles. The Schluter Dietra membrane is actually really easy to put down. You basically take a measurement, unroll it, and you can cut it with an X-Acto knife and a straight edge. And it only costs about 15 to 20% more than a cement board, so in certain applications like mine, I think it's well worth it. Before mixing any mortar to put the membrane down and the tile down on top, I figured I better pre-cut every single tile and lay them out with the spacers, ensuring everything fits perfectly before it's permanently put down. Because I have a bunch of weird notches and things like that I have to cut into the tile, I figured it'd be best to buy a wet tile saw as opposed to just using a tile brake. So I went with the cheapest one I could find at Lowe's, and I gotta say guys, it worked perfectly for this application. It's basically a table saw but for tile. It allows you to cut them pretty much any way you want. I made the marks where I wanted to cut using a China pencil and 2 squares, and I used the tile saw fence when necessary. With the tile layout finally finished, my fiance and I transferred every single tile in the same order over to the rug in the living room before going outside and mixing up the mortar. I don't really have any tips for mixing up mortar. It is what it is. You add the powder, you add the water, you mix it. You're looking for some sort of consistency similar to different types of foods. People say sour cream. I think we went with peanut butter. But it's really easy. It's an electric drill and a paddle bit. You mix for 5 minutes, let it sit for 5 minutes, mix it for 1 more, and you're ready to go. Putting the mortar down for the Sluter Deidre is pretty simple. I used a 1/4 inch V-notch trowel, which is what's recommended for this regular size. There's actually a guide that comes with each roll that tells you what to do and which tools to use in your certain situation. So I'm using a 1/4 inch V-notch trowel, and I'm just spreading the mud down nice and even. Because of the size and access to the spot I was putting the Deidre down, I put down as much mortar as I could basically reach, put the Deidre down only halfway without pressing anything in. Then I finished up with the rest of the mortar and unrolled the membrane. Then I'm using my grout float to apply even and consistent pressure across it. One thing is you don't want to exceed 70 pounds of force with your grout float. And the best thing that I learned out of this is to kind of use your grout float and scrape from one side to the other. Kind of like putting on a window film and you're trying to take out all the air bubbles. Putting the tile down was also fairly straightforward. I used a 1/4 inch square notch trowel. I made sure the grooves were running parallel to the short edge of the tile. And I back buttered every single tile. This doesn't have to be a lot of mortar. It's pretty much the same as spreading butter onto toast. I put 2 to 3 spacers in on the long side of the tile and 1 to 2 on the short side of the tile, depending on where the tile was. I put the wedges in as quickly as possible after both tiles had been laid. I did one long run of tile first, making sure the edges lined up perfectly. Then I worked from the back out to the front using this one row as a reference. And once all the tiles were down, we let the mortar set up for 48 hours. 2 days later, I could remove all the dog proofing. Then we could take out the wedges. You gotta kick them sideways. Like this.
Nothing's happening.
I used a 3-inch putty knife to get all the mortar in the cracks of the tile that were higher than the surface, as well as scrape off any excess mortar on the tile faces. We chose to go with a light gray grout to kind of blend in with the tiles, as well as to hide any dirt. White grout tends to turn into gray grout pretty quickly, so we figured we'd just skip that step. I used my grout float to push it around in every direction into every crack. Then I came back with a damp sponge to wipe it all out. The best tip I can give you here is to either A, use 2 buckets, or B, change the water thoroughly. I got to a point where the grout wasn't lifting up. It's because the water was dirtier than the grout I was trying to lift off the surface of the tile. One of the tiles was sticking out 3/8 of an inch. I thought the transition strip would hide it, but apparently not. I used an angle grinder with a diamond blade to cut the excess off. Then the transition strip fit in perfectly. And yes, I might have accidentally thrown out the screws that came with the transition strips. But don't worry, we've recently bought black ones to replace these ones. I really enjoyed doing this project. It's the first time I've ever done tile, and it was tricky but also very rewarding. If you guys want to see the video on how I made the custom baseboard and 1/4 round around the timber beams that I put in earlier, there'll be a link in the description as well as at the end of the video. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask below. Thanks for watching.
I want to make a joke about how we need to get you shirts that fit you, but like I know you're giant, so they just don't.